Welcome back to Practically Political. I'm Dave Spencer. It's great to have you with us again.
And I'm Carrie Sheffield. Great to have you all.
All right, Carrie, as you would say, let's get right to it. As you know, Alabama has now decided that an embryo is a person, and that has led many clinics in Alabama to suspend in vitro fertilization, or IVF as it's commonly called. And given that this has been a tough issue for the Republican Party, I'd just like to know, A, how do you feel about this so-called personhood? And how do you think it's going to play out in the election?
Yeah, I support both personhood and IVF. And that's actually the position of most Republicans. That's the position of Donald Trump. That's the position of Senate Republicans. That's the position that they put out for a lot of the campaigns. And they urged the Republicans to support IVF. So just taking a step back.
So how is that different then? What would you tell Alabama?
Well, so I support the court ruling. And the reason, so like I said, you can both support, you can walk and chew gum. So I actually think Germany, which is, so there's a lot of hysteria saying, oh, it's a right-wing Christian Republican court. It's like, no, folks, look at Germany, which is a very secular place. Germany has very strict controls on IVF because they just have a conscience. In my view, it really has to do with the science that immediately at conception, there is the unique, distinct stamp of a human life. There's no other genus or species. It's a human. It's a Homo sapien. It's not a giraffe embryo. It's not some like weird plant that's there. It's a human DNA of a separate, distinct human with nothing else needed to be human. And so in Germany, they have a law called the Embryo Protection Act of 1990. So this is even going back decades. And what they say is that you can actually, you're only allowed to create 3 embryos at a time. And all of them must be implanted into the mother's womb at the same time. I don't agree with that because that means basically you could make everyone be a triplet or bear triplets. But I do think the principle is correct. And they also say that any test that may result in the discharge or the destruction of an embryo is illegal. So I think that's the right approach because they're both allowing IVF, but they're being very ethical about it. I think you should have strict limits on the number of embryos you can create at any one time. And that way you're not—
things like stem cell research and that kind of stuff?
Well, you can create stem cells from anything. You don't have to derive it from an embryo.
No, but that wasn't my question. But embryos are very useful, though, in stem cell research. So are you saying that should be banned?
Yeah, I don't agree with embryonic stem cell research, but I agree with stem cell research of any other kind because you can get stem cells from any organ. You can get stem cells from your brain stem. You can get stem cells from your liver. So stem cells is not is different because they're actual. There's a sentient or like a human being, a separate DNA, which is an embryo, versus just a portion of a human being, which is a non-sentient. Your liver never has the capacity to be a sentient human being. It does not ever have the capacity to be a distinct human being with its own separate stamp as a DNA. It's actually just your liver. So very different. And I think people lump stuff together. And I think that this is also when you understand the circumstances of the case, the Mississippi case, it was actually a patient. I don't know how this happened. It was totally horrible. And I think any common person would actually agree what happened was horrible. Some random patient who was in the hospital staying and being treated wandered over to the IVF freezer, somehow was able to open the freezer, take these people's embryos who had paid thousands of dollars to create the embryos and drop them because they were cold on their hands. So how is that okay, Dave? I don't think that you can defend that behavior.
That's a hospital issue. I mean, that's like saying that, because one bank was poorly secured that we should outlaw banking. The logic on that one is, to put it mildly, a little contrived. But I would say a couple of other things. I do think that any researcher will tell you that not being able to use embryonic stem cells will reduce the capacity for research. It's just like with vivisection. You need to sometimes experiment on certain types of beings or cells. So that's number one. Secondly, in Europe, a lot of conservatives always bring up, in Europe they have these bans that that's very similar to the 16-week ban that we want to do. Well, yeah, those are bans that you can also get exceptions for economic reasons. No one would ever talk about having no exceptions for rape or incest or the life of the mother or any of the stuff. So it's a weak comparison that the right tries to use to justify a very austere or abortion policy. But my big picture comment is, what's the effect that this is going to have on the election? A lot of people are scrambling. In fact, I was even reading this morning that Alabama is now scrambling to try to rectify the law because they've gone too far. But this is exactly the kind of slippery slope thing that people feared when Roe was overturned. Because remember, conservatives said, oh, well, all we want to do is just return it to the states. That's it. We promise. And now, of course, they're talking about national abortion bans. And many people are saying, hey, if it's embryonic research now, and how much further behind is birth control? So I think this is a real red flag for the Republican Party going into this year's election. And this is something that they didn't need. And again, it's sort of conservative states run amok in my opinion. But I'll give you the last word on this.
You're such a gentleman, Dave. Thanks. I think that IVF is important. It should be protected. There are so many couples that suffer from infertility and just people who want to be a parent. And we should allow that. And it's a beautiful thing when you're creating life. I just think it needs to be done ethically. So I think that's how you thread the needle, is that you do, I think of it as almost like the jaws of life. You're going and you're getting things and you're saving lives, you're creating lives. So anything that creates life should be embraced. Anything that destroys life should be rejected on both sides.